going to work out great.
To direct a Klingon is much easier because there's a certain level of commitment that you have because you've been sitting in a chair for 3 hours, and you're thinking to yourself probably, I don't want to be here for another 3 hours, so I'm just going to get this right the first time and go on about my business,
Rather, I found a lot of those the headgear that some of them wore, I found rather phony looking. I could see where the stitches were made, so I decided that I would be a little different, and bold and audacious. I went to Nick and I said, listen, I don't want to put all that headgear on. I just want my own head, and I want to be bald and none of that long hair stuff. I want him to look very sleek and sinister and very clean in silhouette. And Nick finally persuaded him, and Nick, being an inventive guy, we're not bound by tradition, said, go ahead. And so I sat for 3 hours and a half every day in the makeup chair. But it was worth it because out came Moisha Dayan. I looked exactly like Moisha Dayan with a patch in the eye, except poor old Moisha did not have a nail through it like I had. And I thought it was a very effective look from all angles.
I think the addition of the nose and the more prominent forehead was just basically, television cried out for doing that. And I asked them if I could make a stronger bone structure to the Klingon head, and then if I could bring it down into their face, as long as we were going to have this very heavy bone structure here, that it'll look silly if we don't bring it down into the face. So then I added the nose to it, and then when they smiled, you had these great white teeth. They took a cast of Michael Dorn's mouth and developed the Klingon teeth. And to this day, I've made every pair of Klingon teeth that any of the guys have ever worn, and how many hundreds, I have no idea.
Well, one of the things, unrelated to this, I did just kind of as a lark, I did an oil painting, the internal anatomy of a Klingon. So on one side you see a Klingon warrior in full regalia, and on the other side you see the internal anatomy to show that although those structures have to fit inside a human body since they're portrayed by human actors, how different they are, that they have a lattice rib cage and redundant bones in the upper arm and kind of weird stomach structures and stuff like that.
They also have physical endurance that we as humans don't have. They have backup systems in their bodies, and they have more powerful musculature, more powerful skeletons.
I think one of the reasons that the Klingons are so popular with the fans is that they have this barbaric nobility, and they behave in ways that we wish we could without being considered utterly obnoxious by other members of our society.
I like to think that I had something to do with the idea that Klingons, this is who they are, this sort of, antisocial, nationalistic, egomaniacal people, because before they definitely had that. But I think that, with the dictionary and the portrayals of all these Klingons, we turn them into not quite so much, anti-establishment as much as like cutting through the bullshit is basically what they do.
They're unfettered by modern conventions. There are no politically correct Klingons. They are what we would often like to be.
With the Klingons, there's so much there still to be explored. In my opinion, we see them on screen for snippets at a time, a certain way, behaving a certain way.
Interestingly enough, there are as many female Klingon fans as there are male Klingon fans, to the point that fans will even go to Klingon language camp, and the linguist who came up with the Klingon language actually will translate books into Klingon, such as the Bible and Hamlet.
The Klingon language has a very unusual beginning. In the entire original Star Trek series, we never hear a word of Klingon. It's not until the opening scene of the first film, and we hear a Klingon speaking. It's actually Mark Leonard, who's most well known to Star Trek fans as Spock's father. But the more obscure piece of trivia there is Mark didn't write those lines. They were created by Jimmy Doohan, a man who years later in another film would say, reading Klingon is hard, is the man responsible for the first spoken Klingon.
Damage control is easy. Reading Klingon, that's hard.
While they were making the third film, they brought in linguist Mark Okrand and gave him this strange task. On the one hand, they said, we want you to create this alien language that's weird and unearthly. And on the other hand, the actors have to be able to pronounce it. And Mark started by going back to those early scenes in the first film and taking those sounds and the subtitles that went with them and basically saying, okay, these sounds have to be in the language, and this particular combination of sounds has to somehow mean these phrases.
I actually was assigned, not necessarily by Nick, but by the producers, a coach for the language of Klingon. I couldn't believe this.
Mark Oakrink was asked to prepare various lines in Shakespeare for the scene for Christopher Plummer to pronounce. And one of them, of course, the classic "to be or not to be" line. That's kind of an awkward quotation for Mark Oakrink, because one of the things he did to make Klingon strange was to leave out the verb "to be."
So I had coaching lessons in this strange language.
He originally gave Plummer the line "yin pa yin be," literally "to live or not live," and Plummer didn't like it. He didn't like the way it sounded. He said, no, come up with something else.
Nick and I worked on this together. We threw in a lot of Shakespeare and a lot of funny one-liners, and we were more caught up in trying to make it entertaining rather than sending any kind of Klingon messages from afar.
Mark Oakrink went back and addressed it again and took a different perspective on it and phrased it instead. We might translate it as whether to continue or not continue his existence.
To be or not to be? That is the question which preoccupies our people, Captain Kirk.
Found out that this guy lived in Washington, this coach, and that the language Klingon had been kind of, I think it was part of the Smithsonian Institute, or it had been an official it was recognized and had been entered into the Washington Language Bureau as an official language.
Tach jaj wo ej tach jaj vodlech ma. Wit toimo vaj nukuv moch jaj ta.
I can copy the Klingon letters very carefully, and I do remember them quite well from doing them over and over again, laying out these consoles. But I have never tried to speak it myself, but I hear it has now evolved to quite a thing where people are actually speaking it and writing it as a language.
Well, I'm familiar with the Klingon alphabet because we do a lot of Klingon graphics, but I don't think I am capable of sitting down and writing a letter in Klingon.
They walk up to me and ask me just say something, Klingonese. Like what? I would say, my dear Captain Kirk.
I got out of an awful lot of Klingon. I said, I tell you what, this guy is is so classically knowledgeable, and obviously General Chang can spout Shakespeare, by the way, that he's forgotten most of his Klingon. He only uses it when he loses his temper. So give me nice short words like plop, plop.
Or my thoughts about the future of Klingons beyond Voyager, B'Elanna Torres, and it's sort of on hold because I think only in the context that I'm working. And now I'm sort of pre-Klingons. We haven't even discovered the Klingons yet, really, ultimately.
There's definitely something about the Klingons that appeals to Star Trek fans at least as much as the Vulcans.
The biggest surprise that I had playing Worf was the idea how many people really love this guy. And because I didn't want him to be loved. I wanted people to hate him, or to, oh God, Worf again, and that was a huge surprise.
There's only a few shows have that power. And in the science fiction field, nobody does it like Star Trek. And no character had more power than a Klingon.
Right now, the Klingons are where they are, in my mind, which is just about where we left off with them. They are strong and worthy adversaries. They are honorable and yet sort of heathen at the same time. They're a fascinating group.